chase here. Nice. So on the left there, what you see is a very early pressure experiment that I was using, and I'm going to tell you about sort of the history of where that came from. And you see this in the center there is a suit submerged on a test in Groton, Connecticut just recently. This is a neutral buoyancy lab suit developed. It's sort of the most recent suit development. Next slide, please. By the way, if you have worn this, slides. Am I doing slides?
Yeah, you can pick it out.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Oh, thank you. By the way, if you have worn any of these pressure suits, and I know a lot of folks here have worn some of these pressure suits, I should admit, I am the person responsible for your claustrophobia, CO2 hits, red marks on your body, crimped toes, and so on. And I'm thrilled to hear from anybody who wants to tell me about what the experience was like in those suits. I'm trying to improve them every iteration, every new variety of suit. I'm trying to improve. Where did it all come from? It really came from spending time in polar and mountaineering environments. And this is in Iceland, an expedition in Iceland. This is a very good day, actually. The weather was really good, but oftentimes there was a very strong wind. I think it should actually be called windland. A very strong wind was blowing. Oftentimes it was dark, of course. It was winter. And I felt that I needed a sort of protective bubble around me. I could use sort of a space suit on here. That was about 2000, and about 8 or so years later, I had sort of started to explore the actual building of these. Next slide, please. Here's the first patent for a pressure suit. This was from Portland, Oregon. This is a patent for a pressure suit by a guy named Fred Sample, and he lived in a little town called Independence, Oregon. This is 1919. He envisioned this as a suit for to prevent decompression in high altitude mountaineering. He thought maybe for aviation as well, but he thought, okay, you can have an enclosed suit.
Recording in progress.
You can have an enclosed suit that keeps a bubble of Earth-like conditions around your body. So very interesting. I need to go down to the Independence Historical Society and dig around there and see what happened. Did he ever build a prototype? I'd like to dig that up if he did. Get some information on this interesting man, Mr. Fred Sample. Next slide, please. The concept was that moving out of those mountaineering and Arctic expeditions, I wanted to go into the adventure of flight, which I'd had as a dream since I was a kid. And so my concept was I would travel as far from the surface of the Earth as I can. And that would be by balloon, essentially. A balloon, I thought at the time, was a relatively inexpensive way to fly. It's not terribly expensive, but it is. Anyway, balloons are a good way to get to extreme altitudes. In the 1930s, on the left there, in the 1960s, on the right, people were using all kinds of crude early pressure suits. They were effective, however. On the left, that's 1936. That's Spartan Swain, very dashing-looking guy from Great Britain. 1936, he got to 49,000 feet in an airplane, and he was wearing a suit that was essentially canvas and rubber and stitched together. He was very leaky. On his first flight, he got visor fog. You've probably all had some visor fog. His visor was frosted over. He was about to crash. He had to use a knife to cut open his visor and peel it back to save himself. He ran out of oxygen. All the problems that you might have had, would have had in 1936 as well. I would also say, do you remember Felix Baumgartner, who jumped out of the balloon about 10 years ago from 130,000 feet, something like that, wearing a spacesuit? What happened to him? Visor fog, lack of mobility, oxygen problems. Same problems since day one. On the right, Victor Prather, an aeronaut who went to 113,000 feet the day before Al Shepard went up as the first American in space. They were testing out the model of suit that he wore in a balloon. They went to 100,000 feet in a balloon, and they were just sitting there in an open cabin. You can see it's just two chairs in a big metal frame. They went to 113,000 feet, effective vacuum, and they were perfectly fine. And they were testing out the suit that was used for the next day's flight. So I was becoming convinced this was the way to get to high altitudes, ballooning. I had put rest in peace with your brother because on the descent, he and his partner, they landed in the water. His partner was extracted and taken away by helicopter. He stood on the hook for the helicopter as it was taking him away, but he fell off. And his suit flooded with water and he drowned. Next one. First layer, on the left, there's Colonel Emilio Herrera in 1936. He had worked out everything you need to know about the bladder to hold pressure and essentially the set of restraints that give you a useful posture. 1936. But then there was a Spanish Civil War, and literally his things were cut apart. His balloon was cut apart to make ponchos for the Spanish army. So history intervened with his attempts to fly at high altitudes. But he had the concept to fly that suit in a balloon to 50, 60,000 feet, something like that. I began, so there's 2010, and what I've got there is an old diving suit. And then I purchased a Russian aviation helmet from eBay for all kinds of reasons that a lot of Russian aerospace stuff leaked onto the eBay and onto the web sort of around this time. Okay, I spent months paying to get the helmet, fused the helmet to this very crude bladder, and started experimentations with being pressurized. I think October of 2010 was I felt pressure inside the suit, and it was very exciting. Next one, please. Second layer. On the left, you see suits around the 1966 range. This is actually Gene Cernain's Gemini EVA suit, so this is what he wore floating outside his spacecraft, not walking on a surface, but floating outside his spacecraft. And you see that there's an inner layer here. This is the middle layer. So there was the bladder that holds the gas in. This is the middle layer, and this is the coverall. So this middle layer is tailored and cut such that as the suit inflates, instead of taking this, which is the posture that it wasn't, it starts to give you a useful posture. And as it inflates, the posture is achieved. So here I'm working on this now. I have started to copy, essentially, reverse engineer everything that was done by NASA in the development of these suits in the 1950s and 60s. You can find it all, essentially, at the NASA Technical Report Server. Thousands of PDFs describing everything that they did. And if you learn to read these, which I did over several years, and you learn to sort of replicate their methods, you can engineer what they did. So I copied essentially a great many of their methods and began, okay, here's the second layer. I had the bladder down, I had an understanding of how the bladder works to maintain pressure. And okay, here's a coverall that starts to give you a reasonable shape. Next one, please. Third layer. One of my heroes, Eileen Collins, a space shuttle commander. She's wearing the pumpkin suit. One of the NASA managers told me that nobody ever believed that this suit was going to work to save people in any conceivable space shuttle disaster. It was largely for public consumption. It's got two big heavy oxygen bottles in the legs. The concept was that the hatch would come off and this pole would come out and slide out this pole like a fireman, and that would be your way to survive. But I was told by this former NASA manager that was purely for public consumption. The suit doesn't need all of that bulk, nor does it need to have that cost that is associated with all of that bulk. I started a concept as I was building these suits for my own flying. I started thinking, maybe I can make a philosophical point by getting the price of these radically down. So instead of the $100,000 suit like this, I wanted to make it a $1,000 suit, for example. And the materials now for an essential IAA suit that just protects you on the way to the orbit and then protects you on the way back from orbit, the materials are about $1,000. It's the labor. It's the hours of fabrication time and then the testing afterwards to verify it that is actually the cost. So on the right there, I was just about to go to Denmark. I was connected with a group called Copenhagen Suborbitals who were building a liquid-fueled rocket to send human beings to suborbital space. That's about 10 years ago now, and they slowed down radically. They had some explosions, so they slowed down radically. I'm not sure where they are. I'm checking on them once in a while. It was very exciting at the time. The idea was I would build the suit for the astronaut, and they would pay for my balloon flight to 100,000 feet, just like they did earlier on. They would pay for that flight at somewhere over the Baltic, because they were in international waters and they could do things out there closer to mainland Europe. So I was just about to go to Europe, to Copenhagen there, testing that suit for the last time, and you can see I was mimicking what I had seen. For a long time, I mimicked things, and I even mimicked technologies and pieces of equipment, and then started to realize I don't necessarily need this. So my process has been from mimicry to elimination, actually, to getting rid of as much as I can, trying to get these as simple as I can. Next one, please. A few years later, I had suits that were roughly in the Mercury or Gemini level of technology. The leak rate is really the best way to measure this. How leaky is the suit? And the leak rates by this time, about 14, 15, were on order or on par with Mercury and Gemini suits. And that was perfectly fine. That's all I needed. I didn't need a completely, perfectly gas-tight suit. I have had advice from really exceptional people. Here's Mike Mosley. My workshop is my apartment, which is downtown, right in the middle of downtown Portland. And my door opens up to the sidewalk. And I leave the door in summers to get air moving through it. Okay, so I'll be working in there, and you can see in from the sidewalk. One day, this gentleman goes to the door, he knocks at the door, which is open, and he says, "This looks very familiar." And I invited him in, and he was Mr. Mike Mosley. He worked for 44 years at Boeing, and he had been testing Gemini suits in the 1960s. And so they hung out there for a couple of hours, and the greatest thing was I went over all my numbers. Well, what pressures am I using? What are the gases I'm using? And he said, "Yes, exactly what we did." This was a huge boost to me. I forgot to put in a picture of the MIT suit team with Dr. David Newman. Professor David Newman came out and saw what I was doing. And I was terrified. And the fact that they didn't sort of run screaming from my little home workshop here was also a big boost. I thought, okay, it doesn't just look, it looks crazy, but it's actually functional. So, good advice from various people. And here's currently one of my balloon co-pilots, Joseph Pearson, wearing one of those earlier suits. You see it's very functional. I covered it up to make it look nice or anything like that. It's entirely functional. It's very much like a Mercury or a Gemini suit. Next one, please. Hyperbaric chamber testing in Copenhagen. So Copenhagen subordinates when we got over there at the University Hospital in Copenhagen. It was the first time I was in a low pressure chamber. And they took me down to, just like the Air Force, they took me down to 25,000 feet pressure equivalent, and the suit was doing fine. My biomedicals were all fine. We were recording heart rate and all of that. It was very exciting to actually have the suit being tested there. Next one, please. All this time I was flying, learning how to fly, so I have a balloon. You see my instruments up on the right. That's all been replaced by digital instruments, which are old analog ones, which are really great, but they weigh a lot, and every pound costs me altitude. So I'm still on this quest to get as far from the surface of the Earth as I can with the balloons that I can build. So I've switched to even lighter stuff. So there's actually you probably know Trent Fish down there, and he's bringing Coco. And Kai was out there once, twice with us flying as well, 3 times maybe, Kai. 2 times. So all this time we were flying, and that's when I began to discover there are discomforts. And I remembered this phrase from my climbing years, it doesn't have to be fun to be fun. So another one is the best quality of a mountaineer is a short memory. So okay, you wear these things, it's not like a science where you slip in and you just sort of go to what you do. You have discomforts, you have those red marks, you have things pressing on you, and even the best suits made by NASA, for example, though they're not made by them, used by NASA, for example, for the International Space Station. If you listen to interviews with those astronauts when they're finished, they say it's like having run a marathon. to do an 8-hour EVA. It's like having done a marathon. They're all marked up. The bruises everywhere, all kinds of damage to their fingernails, I'm sure of that one. So, but that's okay, as long as it doesn't get in the way, right, of the performance of carrying out the mission. Now, there's a fine line. You don't want it to be so uncomfortable that they're barely getting away with, what it is they needed to do. But the point is, comfort has been secondary for me for the flying suit for a long time. Other people are starting to use them, for example, here at Sam. I have to think about that a little bit more when I'm starting. Okay, next one, please. Let's fly a little bit higher. This is out in the Alvord Desert in eastern Oregon. Not a very good picture, but there's one of our older balloons that's been replaced now. Next one, please. So all the while when I was developing the suits, I was continuing to fly. After a few years, we're at orbital EVA level. You might know the first orbital EVA workers who went out of the spacecraft, Russian Alexei Leonov, early 1960s, and ran immediately into trouble. His suit overinflated. If you wore one of these suits, you probably know there's a valve here or something where you can depressurize your suit. He had to do that because as he came out, he floated around for a while and then he tried to get back in the airlock, which is that long tube. His suit had inflated so much he couldn't fit in anymore. So he had to manually depressurize a little bit. Very tricky because he didn't have any instruments to tell him, really what's happening with his suit. He could easily have gotten the bends very quickly from rapid decompression. But he managed to get through. He was an American who had terrible early floating outside the craft EVA experience. He had visor fog, he had lack of mobility due to high pressure, and he was rapidly overheated. At the end, he says, only Tom, he's talking about his after he was flying with it, only Tom really knows how close he was to dying on that EVA. So, there are risks and dangers and discomforts involved with this early technology. Next one, please. Kind of dim, you can see just on the right there, this is my first time underwater, so we figured, well, the suits are holding air, let's go underwater. Let's try out some sort of neutral buoyancy experiments. Here's a diver on your right, and me just barely visible on the left there. So I can be underwater and floating around and sort of having that experience and sort of understanding a little bit of what those early orbital EVAs were like. Next one, please. There's Trish once again. In the middle, I was talking to Trent this morning. I had to mention I have a lot of pictures of Trent looking very uncomfortable and wondering what he's sort of doing. So I'm totally oblivious looking at a gauge over here, and he's sort of looking at me like, I am. The suit is inflating beyond where it's supposed to be. He's being buried in the suit. This was early on. We're starting now to put in a lot of reinforcements and so on the underlayer of the suit, and these are starting to give us the restraints required for mobility, for actually walking. But as you know, on the moon, they didn't end up walking or striding, like it's striding. They do a sort of skipping, they do a sort of hopping, but striding actually isn't needed. But anyway, starting at that point, that's about 2017, Trent came in 2016. Actually, I looked up his first email to me the other day. It was in 2016. He said, I'm interested in being part of your testing team and your mission. So he started coming down from Seattle on weekends to help out. Next one, please. Improving improving the elbow mobility using a sort of accordion shape or a bellows shape. Again, this was for an Apollo type suit. Next one, please. There's Trent once again. He's ascending a rope. Here, we wanted to see, were we getting anywhere with this suit for outdoors, walking on surfaces and so on, instead of floating. So here he's ascending a rope with a prusik, or just a knot around the rope, and here I'm looking straight down at him, and he's climbing the rope. Very warm. The other day, I think I lost about 3 or 4 pounds in sweat.
2 liters of water.
I'm sorry?
At least 2 liters.
Yeah, so after using the suit the other day for the video, I don't know if you saw Kai's video, he just shot the other day. But after that, yes, we took the suit off and we held it upside down, and about, Matthias, I'm going to believe it, 2 liters of water poured out of it. And it wasn't water, it was sweat. But anyway, so we didn't have a cooling system, and this day in August of 17, we also didn't have cooling system. But it's okay. It's hot and sweaty and it's uncomfortable, but you're in a pressurized suit. And I always sort of think to myself, how many people got to do this? How many people got to be in a pressurized suit today? You know? Next one, please. There's the bladder of the suit. You can see a spray bottle, and what I'm doing there is I'm looking for leaks. This is the way you test for leaks. You spray it down with soapy water, you find pinpoint leaks in tiny bubbles, big leaks in larger bubbles. And you go in and seal them up. And once you've done a lot of experimentation, you know how to make the seams so that they don't leak, if they still leak a little bit. You find the right kind of sealants, the kind of sealants that do adhere to the polyurethane coating and so on, which took years to figure. You get to a point where, okay, the whole system is working well. You know, notice here I'm working with a different kind of helmet. Prior, all those who sell those old Russian helmets, right? By this time I started making my own helmets. The MIT people actually told me, don't try to make your own helmets, it's going to be too hard. So that's why I started trying. And so here is the principles are the same. There's a bladder, that's the yellow material inside there. But on top of it, kind of smaller than the bladder, so that it absorbs the mechanical stress, is a mesh, an athletic mesh that does not stretch. That is providing the structure of the helmet. And then sewn on the front is a polycarbonate bubble, and it's sewn on very carefully and then sealed up so that it's gas tight. And you can see the shape and size of the bladder. Remember, layer one was the bladder. It's much larger than the suit that you actually wear. Again, so that as it inflates, it hits the restraint layer, right? And the restraint layer takes the strain, rather than the bubble, the pressure of the bladder taking the strain. Next one, I'll have a better picture of that as we go. The Singaporean aviator came along, Mr. Lin Seng, and he said, I'd like a suit for high altitude. So I built a suit for him for extremely high altitude. He was going again 100,000 feet. That was his concept. To be absolutely sure to keep him safe, I made two bladders on this suit. So I made one, and then I made almost a duplicate of that, just a little bit, cut a little bit differently, the one inside the other. And again, our pressure decay, our pressure loss, right, when you turn everything off and observe how much is it leaking, was very low. It was comparable to NASA suits today. And I thought, very good. He came over from Singapore for about a week. We did all kinds of tests. We flew to 25,000 feet, wearing the suit. He was very happy. He took his flight. On his way to 60,000 feet, his first flight, on his way up, his cabin lost pressure. There was a problem with his cabin. He lost pressure, but he pumped up his suit and made a safe descent. And the whole way down, he was transmitting, oh well. So this was great. He was the guinea pig for my for my suit. He proved, at least from 25,000, that the suit did its job, kept him alive. So that feels really great. And he's still flying, and I think he's going to have a two-person capsule now. So he's still trying to get to 100,000 feet. Next one, please. That's us right after our test flights at 25,000 feet. Next one, please. And there's them saying, and when he landed his capsule, the parachutes would not disengage. He pulled the lever to cut them free, they wouldn't. And so for about an hour, he was being dragged in his capsule across Australia, banging in, and he said, I was sure I was going to die. He said it was ironic, I survived the flight, but on the banging of this, being dragged, I was going to die that way. But he didn't die, he's there, and he's willing to fly again, so big hero. Next one, please. By this time, we had gotten into quantification. The difference between a stunt and an exploration, I believe, is how you report the experience. I look at the word explore. X is to go out and do something, and plore refers to describe it. So it's like you go out and you do something, and then if you come back and describe it, okay, you're an explorer. I started to quantify things. So these are CO2 rates, CO2 levels on lots of different tests, and we found that all of our numbers were in line with what's going on in NASA suits and Air Force suits and so on. I started to diagram and document everything. I started to release these technical reports or technical briefs to, keep track of everything also. Next one, please. There's a Mars surface exploration suit, also out in the Alfred Desert, and now by this point we have a variety of biomedical sensors on board, and they're recording things like heart rate and CO2 level and so on. But they were always being put together by a variety of people who would come into the project and then they'd get a job or whatever, and they'd have to melt away. And so I'm very excited to start using Kai's universal atmospheric monitor to start recording the properties of the suit inside as we go on. Next one. And I met Dr. Lawrence Kuznets. He worked in the Apollo program. Here he is on the right, one on your left. He worked on the thermal regulation of Apollo lunar suits. That was his doctoral thesis. He said in the late 60s, as they were working towards getting to the moon, he said they were hiring everybody and they were trying everything. He said their spacesuit lab was going 24/7 for years. There wasn't a moment where there wasn't a team, people wearing prototypes, somebody cutting, somebody sewing, 24/7 for years. That's how they got such amazing suits for Apollo. There it is, he was on Johnny Carson twice. Put Johnny Carson in the lunar hat or something. And here it is on the right. And he's watching this guy who's wearing a suit. This is again at my place. The suit from the neck down is filled with CO2. It's a very crazy concept by Dr. Kuznets to use Mars' atmosphere to pressurize the suit below the neck. There's a neck dam. Pressurize and cool the bottom. You're just flowing gas through the suit below the neck dam. You're using a free, infinite resource atmospheric carbon dioxide. You flow that through, and that carries away body heat, replacing the complexity and weight of a liquid cooling garment. I've worn these for many hours, and I will say it's a concept. I will also say you are very aware that your suit is mostly filled with poison gas. So right now our tests are going towards making sure that the neck dam can never blow through, or that you can never get CO2 getting past that neck dam. And that'll be at UC San Diego, Aerospace Medical Lab, where I'll wear this suit and sort of have people push me over and trip, and I'll be upside down, all kinds of things to just make sure we can't have that. Next one, please. Oh yeah, if we go back one slide. My quote from this one is, these Apollo guys were brutal. Or there's a brutality to what they did because they were so focused on getting this done. And I was in the suit one time, and the pressure was high, and things were going pretty well. But I heard him say to his other buddy there, he's talking about me, and Dr. Kuznets goes, well, we can knock this guy out. It's okay. He'll be okay. But we got to get these numbers. We got to get these numbers. So he's ready to knock me out just to get his data. That's part of the way that they made it to the moon. It's that single-mindedness. They haven't knocked me out yet. Okay, next one, please. So here's Dr. Kuznets' Mars suit at Human Mars Summit a few years ago. And by that time I had built a better pattern. So I was starting with the textile, I put the zippers on and everything. And I had gotten a really good pattern now. I was much advanced from 2010 when I was just using the old diving suit. So by that time the suit was looking, I also did things to make it look right because you couldn't have these crazy looking things. 5 minutes with crazy looking things that I was constructing earlier. So we demonstrated this and started to get people interested in this concept. I think there are many suits that will be used on Mars wherever we go. There's no one solution. There are all kinds of suits that will be used. So maybe there will be a purpose for the CO2 poison suit. Next one, please. We'll go really quick. All the while we're flying, so if you want to come fly, just get in touch with me. I'll put my contact information again. We'll be flying through the summer, and that's the suit that I used to fly in. It's not for walking, it's for standing in this balloon basket, and sometimes there's a co-pilot with me. The co-pilots are volunteers. People come fly with me. That's my beautiful, beautiful balloon called Skyline. Next one, please. That's lifting off in Skyline. A very, very nice day. Here's the Mars start. So, as we continue along, okay, Mars EVA was a good idea. as it turns out, though, because of Mars gravity, the portable life support system that people wore on the moon, for example, is much too heavy to use on Mars. And at any conceivable numbers, it still looks like the life support system, the backpack, is going to be too heavy on Mars. So I started with the concept more than 10 years ago. I published just sketches of the concept based on my exploration, where I was pulling my equipment behind me. And I started with the concept, let's move the life support system off on the cart that you tow behind you. Next one, please. It started out just as a sketch. Next one, please. Now we have a prototype, and we're starting to build it. Starting to test it out. So here's a prototype used in Eastern Oregon. It's basically a cart with wheels. When you put your liquid oxygen supply, or your gaseous oxygen supply, your scrubber, anything we need to keep you alive is in the cart. You see that there's an umbilical. You can disconnect from it and walk around a little bit. You can walk back and you can get equipment from it. You can also disconnect from it entirely and take a walk for a little while on a separate bottle of gas. Next one, please. That's what a bladder looks like before it's folded and stuffed inside. The way that I achieve mobility is with all of these pleats and these careful folds. It's sort of like origami. But that's the inflated bladder before it's put. In fact, that is the bladder, if you go back one, that's inside that suit. The bladder is right there. Next one, please. And the next one. And the next one. So continuing to fly off all the time. Sometimes we have a larger team, sometimes smaller. There's Kai again. Trent again. Next one, please. There's Trent again. Please. Trent inside the balloon, flying. And Trent flying the balloon. Oh, once again, with a kind of worried look on his face. And we're flying, and he's looking at his numbers. He's got 2 PSI in his suit. That's good. Makes it very hard to work in. He's about 7,000 feet there. Kai Stotts came along, thankfully, and was building this incredible facility that you know about, and wanted to have some suits that people could wear to sort of round out the entire experience of this pressurized habitat. So Kai came along and said he'd like these suits, he'd like to have them in this interesting color scheme rather than the white, very technical colors that you typically see. And so before delivering them, we tested them in Eastern Oregon. Here you see people climbing with them. I want to be sure that you can really move in them. Next one, please. There they are.
You forgot that I called you and said, don't scratch my loose.
Yes. Hard to do if you crawl around the log in Eastern Oregon. But I think they're arriving pretty good. I've been refurbishing them recently, making them a little bit easier. I put on a different kind of boot so that people with smaller feet can get in. I've had size 11 boots on there, as I'm sure many of you know. This is massive, and you need a smaller boot. So I've addressed that in the last couple of weeks. Next one, please. Okay, along with Matt Harrison of the Poland Astronaut Training Center, you see in the Polish Air Force Academy. Let's make a suit for underwater. I know we've got about 2 minutes left, probably. 1 minute. Okay, let's go on, please. Started building it. I was very confident of my Apollo suit pressure levels. I had reached the Apollo suit performance by this time, late a year or so ago. And so, okay, I once again developed that at home. Next one, please. Some of you might know folks from the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences. There's Jason Reinhold on the left, Chris Lundin in the center, and they started to use this suit at my brother's swimming pool in Oregon. And that's the first next one, please. Eventually, so okay, now I'm underwater, I'm walking on the surface of the bottom, I've got weights on me, I'm able to walk underwater. There's Chris Lundin, I'm giving him the okay. Next one, please. And this is the final one. So here's Matt Harrison. He's got a spare bottle of oxygen, the little yellow one, or air. He's got weights on his legs. We're going to streamline those. But now we have a neutral buoyancy lab suit where you can go underwater and have neutral buoyancy or space type training. Next one, please. And he'll be there as he's starting to descend down. And if we go to the end, you'll see just my information, contact information. There's the Mars system. Here's our team. Sometimes it's larger, sometimes it's smaller. If you come flying with us, through the summer. This is the size of the craft. I just wanted to graph it to compare it to, for example, the lunar module. So that's what you're flying in. I've shut down all my web. I'm doing a great simplification, so I'm changing everything now. So updates on what I'm doing spacesuit-wise are typically at Instagram, but if you want to get in touch and come and fly,